They asked me to appear before your meeting with a few thoughts on price. And the first thing I'm going to say about price is it's worth noting that of all the ways of selling things, dropping the retail price is almost always the most expensive. It's effectively equivalent to bribing people to buy your product. Yes, it works. Sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you have no choice. But I think it should be the last thing you do rather than the first thing you do. Dropping the price is something you should do when you have exhausted all the alternatives. Now, one thing I've noticed about the wine industry is they have this strange phrase, bin ends. Okay? And it goes, oh, well, there are only 3 or 4 bottles left of this stuff, so it now becomes a bin end, and it's assumed that you sell it at a discount. On the other hand, what a marketer would do is say, there are only 4 bottles of this wine left, and use scarcity to charge a premium for it. What something's worth isn't really a product of what it is, it's actually a product of how you present it, and how the person responds emotionally to the same thing. There are, by the way, in wine as in fashion, occasions where actually it pays to charge more. Greater expert by far than me on the subject, Justin Fattorini, makes the point that, as perhaps with female fashion, what we spend on wine is often driven by the significance of the occasion. And just as someone probably wouldn't go to Primark to buy a dress for their best friend's wedding, nobody wants to spend $8.99 on an occasion that warrants a $21.99 wine. So we've got to be really careful here before we discount too readily. The other thing is that it's generally cheaper to provide value on rather than money off. That's another useful learning. Effectively, for example, well, you could say this wine used to cost $14.99 and now costs $11.99. That's not bad, okay? If you say, for example, this wine costs $14.99 and tastes better than 5 wines I've tasted that cost £25, that's actually adding value rather than subtracting cost. And the one is always better than the other. Fundamentally, the job of the marketer, okay, is to get people who wouldn't have bought something to pay full price for it. All too often, in an age of performance marketing, what we end up doing is getting people who would have bought the product anyway to buy it slightly sooner at a discount. And unfortunately, algorithms often can't necessarily distinguish between what is a genuine acquired customer and what's merely a purchase brought forward. I think there are a load of things we can discuss about price, and provided that price dropping is not a knee-jerk reaction, okay, I think we'll all do a lot better. When things are mispriced, it is almost always the case that they're underpriced. That's one learning from huge amounts of research into pricing, for instance. Another thing to realise is that if you do discount, or if you do offer additional value, free X with every 3 Ys, for example, whatever you do, try and make it feel exclusive to the recipient of the offer. The perceived value of a discount partly depends on the difficulty of receiving it, ironically. The more qualifications you set for receiving a discount, the greater the perceived value of the discount may be. And likewise, the more exclusively directed a discount is, the more we perceive it to be valuable. It's sometimes called the idiosyncratic fit heuristic, and the example I always give, I have no idea why, is if you say 20% off washing machines for ginger people, okay, ginger people will find that inordinately more exciting and will see the perceived value of the saving as much, much higher than if you simply say 20% off for everybody. So tricks like, because you have been a member for X years, you qualify for a 20% discount, will at least mean that the discount can be slightly smaller and the actual perceived value of the saving is correspondingly greater. So price is bizarrely psychological. I mean, it's the idea of economists that there's a kind of utility price trade-off and that our perception of price is somehow completely objective. No, I'm afraid that's wrong. Now, one experiment I always wanted to do, and I'm going to tell you this, okay, in kind of confidence, is I always wanted to do an experiment where you said 50% extra free on shampoo or chocolate bar. or something, but you put the price up by 50%. Now, obviously, it's completely dishonest and it's completely illegal. The reason I wanted to do the experiment is I wanted to see what difference it made to give the impression of a deal versus the effect of an actual deal or discount in terms of price reduction. Now, obviously, I can't perform this experiment. As I said, I'd end up in jail. But I mentioned it once to someone in a company which, for obvious reasons, I won't name, and they said, we do know the results of that experiment because we're an enormous global company, and every now and then we do that by mistake. We put 50% extra free on a package of something or other, and we forget to rekey the price, and we put up the price by 50%. I said, what happens? He said, I can't give you the figures for obvious reasons. Let me just put it this way. It's embarrassing how much money we make. And so quite often you can create the impression of a deal without necessarily surrendering that much in the way of margin. Those of you who go to Marks and Spencer's have probably bought 3 things for £7. Have you ever actually added up the price of the 3 individual items to see how much you're saving by getting this deal? I suspect most of us haven't. We just go, well, I better buy a 3rd thing because otherwise I won't get the deal. Without actually calculating the value of the deal, we nonetheless perceive there's something of value there. So I think there's something really, really interesting here. I think that wine is particularly bizarre as a category because, of course, one of the reasons restaurants love serving it is there's actually no known price point. Okay? Broadly speaking, you can't charge sort of 27 quid for a single glass of Johnny Walker Black because people know what it costs. The glorious thing with wine is it's muddied the waters of comparison, which is precisely what potentially makes it lucrative. The other great problem, I think, with discounting is you train people to buy on deal. And it becomes, we all probably have websites where we go, I can't be bothered to look at the whole range of clothing, so I'll just look at the outlet, okay? Now, I think there's something really interesting going on here, which is there are far more exciting ways to discount than simply dropping the price. You can add value to people in all forms of imaginative new value exchange before you start basically cutting the headline price. I'm not opposed to doing it. Sometimes you have to do it. At some stage, particularly at the stage of acquisition, I think you may be unable to avoid it. All I'm saying is it shouldn't be the first thing you do when you want to move merchandise. It should be one of a range of tools you consider, and it should be in many ways the one you do last. Just think of it this way. 50% extra free is perceived by consumers as being more valuable than 33% off. And yet, actually, the margin lost is considerably less. It's a much, much cheaper thing to offer, and yet it has a higher perceived value. Look for asymmetries like that first before you start doing the obvious.